Hi, good morning, Philippines. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning around the world. My co-host is NREA Secretary General, Mr. Jovi Tupas.
Hello and good morning also to my beautiful co-host and Rhea Vice President for Internal Affairs, Ms. Imelda Magtoto. And welcome everyone to our fourth Enrea online business forum with the topic Philippine Building Act as a replacement for the National Building Code of the Philippines.
So let us call on our NREA National Auditor, Ms. Ruth Marie Atienza, to lead us in prayer.
Morning. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty and loving Father, you are our creator and our sustainer. You are our light and our fortress. You are our wisdom and our strength. We praise you and adore you, eternal God. Make your face shine upon us and be gracious to us. We pray that we may feel your presence and lead us through the fourth NREA Business Forum online. Send us your Holy Spirit to be our guide and give us the wisdom to understand every topic that shall be discussed. Enlighten our minds and let your love be upon us. May this business forum be fruitful and drive all stakeholders in the real estate industry to be positive agents of change in the midst of these challenging times. May we be channels of your grace to make others feel and realize that you alone are our hope, our peace in these uncertain times we live in. Renew in us the grace of your resurrection that we may share the good news in whatever we are going through. In all that we do, may we give you honor, glory, and thanksgiving. This we pray in the mighty name of your Son, Jesus Christ, and through the powerful intercession of our Blessed Mother Mary. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Morning.
May I request again a pleasant good morning to everyone who would like to mention our very generous and ever dear sponsors, Megawide, E. Ganzon Incorporated, Jack Enterprises, and Duraville Realty and Development Corporation. Thank you very much.
Yes, we have 15 Board of Trustees and Officers for 2020, led by Architect Grace Layu, Board Chair Lady, Benigno Cabrera Jr., our Vice Chairman, and National President Ricky M. Celis. For our Board of Advisors, we have Marisa Del Mar, our Chair Emerita and Chair Lady of Board of Advisors, together with Architect Felino A. Palafox Jr., Architect Nestor Esmangio, Alejandro Manyala, Bansan Chowa, and Marcelo Mars Mendoza.
We would also like to say thank you and good morning to our chapter presidents and board members from Enrea Metro CBD chapter, Enrea Baguio Car chapter, Enrea Bataan chapter, Enrea Pampanga chapter, Enrea Zambales chapter, Enrea Cavite chapter, Enrea Cebu chapter, Enrea Cagayan de Oro chapter, Enrea Zamboanga chapter, and soon 3 more chapters. We would also like to thank the cooperation and being helpful of our NREA Secretariat headed by Executive Director Aurora M. Puso.
We would like to welcome our NREA National President, Mr. Ricky Celis, for the opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. We thank you for your continuous patronage of our online program. This is our 6th NREA Business Forum for the year, of which virtually this will be our 5th consistent monthly installment. Along the way, we have covered a vast range of relevant subjects, attracting the interest and attention of an equivalent span of real estate developers, corporations, institutions, professionals, and other stakeholders. Today's focus is on an equally significant theme, the National Building Code of the Philippines. NBCP or PD 1096 has provided the construction sector, the walls, the floors, and the ceiling of our design, permitting, and development activities over the last 43 years. Has it served its purpose? Are we revising or amending it? Or are we altogether bringing in a new act, a new code, new set of guidelines and standards in its place? This is the proposed Philippine Building Act. Surely the real estate industry, collectively, including of course your organization and REA, pushes to ensure residential housing, both socialized and economic housing, to be accorded their own place, their own class, its own permitting route, recognizing of course the significance of the main occupant, the Filipino family. We are excited to have with us today the driving force behind the PBA, who will share the highlights and salient provisions under the bill. The Association of the Structural Engineers of the Philippines has also taken its own initiative to put together volume 3 of the Structural Code of the Philippines, dedicated on single-family dwelling units. No less than the incumbent asset president will present the framework and latest update. Lastly, regulatory oversight will of course be key in the implementation phase, a role performed by various government agencies. Among them, of course, are DSUD, LGUs, and with us today is the Department of Interior and Local Government. NREA formally extends its appreciation to our esteemed resource speakers for taking the time to perform yet another service to the real estate and construction industries. So without further ado, on behalf of our Board of Trustees, our advisors, our chapters, and of course our generous sponsors, welcome to the September edition of NREA's Business Forum Online. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you, President Ricky. But we have house rules to follow. Everybody will be muted during the talk. Only the speaker can unmute himself or herself to avoid background noise. If you have questions, you can write them in the chat box. Our moderators will assess and handle them after all the speakers have spoken. So let's start.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker and presenter this morning is an accomplished professional in the field of civil and structural engineering. He is a licensed civil engineer and he finished his civil engineering degree at the University of the Philippines. He is also a senior lecturer in the Institute of Civil Engineering in the same university. He is currently and the past president for several years of the Association of Structural Engineers of the Philippines. Some of his honors and awards include the Most Distinguished Alumnus for Civil Engineering of the University of the Philippines in 2005, and the Filipino Outstanding Civil Engineer in 2012, awarded by the Philippine Institute of Civil Engineers. May I have the honor to present to you Engineer Ronaldo Santos Ison.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. May I share my screen now? Okay, so today I will be discussing about the National Structural Code and its relation to the proposed Philippine Building Act. So I would like to show you some slides on various damages that we have experienced for the past so many years now. So I would like to show you this slide from the earthquake damages in the North Zone earthquake. You would see here liquefaction damages and short column effects. And then you will see here the damages of earthquake in the 2003 and the 2002 Masbate and General Santos earthquake. So here you would see the more recent 2013 Bohol earthquake. You would notice that there are similar damages that has occurred. Now you have massive heavy floors, soft stories. This is very prevalent in most of the earthquake occurrences inspections that ASEP had made throughout the years. So more recently, in the 2019 Mindanao earthquake, we have seen a lot of damages in most parts of Mindanao. No? And in one particular area, this is in Makilala, nearly 50% of similar houses in a subdivision were severely damaged. No? So is this poor construction or design? And then in 2013, we experienced the Typhoon Yolanda. Uh, this is a windstorm occurrence, a typhoon. Despite that, we also have large damages or damages to the structures similar to earthquake damages, which I have shown you before. So again, our question is it poor construction or design, or have we neglected the wind effects on the various elements of the structural system? So through the years, in 1990, we went to the Baguio earthquake or the Nordazon earthquake, and we saw damages to various structures. In fact, a number of buildings have collapsed. And in 2013, in the 2012, the Negros Oriental earthquake, we also look into various damages into the structures affected by the earthquake. We saw that most of the damages
As
sim-
we saw in our first session yesterday, much of what we will be doing.
okay, so as I've said, no, much of the damages in both the 1990 and the 2012 earthquake are similar. No? So you have the column ties widely spaced. No? So we have seen this all over the Philippines for the various earthquakes. No? And I think basically there's a question: are we really learning our lessons from previous experiences? So in more recent earthquakes and in the past earthquakes, we have seen that we have been constructing a lot of our structures uh, using the same practices. No, like for example, this photo here, we have a photo of a very strong window. You would notice that the hollow block walls are substandard, and these are severely damaged during the Bohol earthquake. So for the past so many earthquakes that we have had experience in inspecting in the Philippines, we have learned that uh, a number of occurrences or a number of damages that has been that has been occurring in the for our structures are based on our malpractices in the field of construction and design. So, for example, we continuously use substandard materials like low strength CHB load bearing for load bearing walls. We use substandard reinforcing bars with small diameters and large spacings. And then our members or connections to roofing systems, anchorages are improperly done. And in most cases, most residential structures are improperly engineered, meaning they are incapable of resisting lateral forces. So these are wind and earthquake forces. In many cases, when we talk to owners or when we talk to contractors or construction workers, they would often say, um, in our lingo, they would often say, matagal ko nang ginagawa yung ganyang type of construction, hindi naman bumabagsak. No? Perhaps we are so used to not experiencing earthquakes or strong winds such that we often feel that when our structures are standing, they are okay. No? So these are what we are experiencing. So also we have noticed poor construction methodology and outdated detailing and construction practices. We have continuously used for the longest time, most often in the provinces, outdated detailing standards, and we just passed on our construction practices from years way back. Also, we have seen a lot of concerns wherein we failed to account for soil conditions. So a number of structures are being built, not looking into the condition of the site or conditions of the soil, and a large number of failures that we have seen or have inspected are due to low bearing capacities, swelling, liquefaction potential, like what you've seen in these pictures, and in Bohol, sinkholes. So we also fail to recognize hazards that are present in the site, like slope failure, landslide, or erosion potentials. So these things are very important in the design and construction of our structures, and we must learn to appreciate the mistakes that we have made so that we can build better structures. Many are, as I've said, no, many are compliant. However, there is a need to continuously educate a lot of people within the construction industry. So the owners, developers, the engineers, contractors, building officials. We need to inform and educate everybody to follow the current standards and code requirements. Okay, so that brings me to the National Structural Code of the Philippines. So that National Structural Code of the Philippines is the referral code of the National Building Code for structural design and construction of buildings. So this code has the provisions for structural design of buildings and the standards for the use of different materials. No, and this is continuously updated by the asset. No, so after an update, this is approved by the DPWH to become the official referral code of the National Building Code. So why is there a need for us to continuously update? No, despite that the NBC is about 40 years old, the latest NSCP is only about 5 years old. No? And there's a need for us to continuously update the NSCP as international standards as well as local researches are being updated by the asset. No? So basically, what is the objective of the code? No, for seismic design and for seismic design, it is expected that for major earthquakes, we will have life safety and we will be preventing the collapse of the structure. So when we design these structures, it is expected that for very strong earthquakes, these structures would not suffer collapse and would ensure that the occupants of the building would be able to go out. So it prevents structural collapse, it prevents failure of non-structural components, and preserve the means of egress. So it also its objective is also to reduce structural and non-structural repair costs. So I've seen questions about the seismicity of the Philippines. No, in the NSCP we consider a lot the effects of the earthquake of earthquake occurrences in the Philippines. No, if you look at the middle slide or the middle picture, you would see that we have earthquakes all over the Philippines for the last 400 years. So this can be small magnitude earthquakes like magnitude 4, and then large magnitude earthquakes up to magnitude 8. No, and you would notice that it is only in Palawan, Palawan, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi, where we don't have much earthquakes. No, but nevertheless, when an earthquake happened somewhere in the center part of the Philippines, Palawan will still be affected. So that's why in international standards, the whole Philippines is under Zone 4, and Palawan and Tawi-Tawi will still be under Zone 2, not Zone 0, where you don't have earthquake. Zone 2 would still experience a number of earthquakes or ground accelerations when earthquakes happen. To your left, you would find the Philippine fault map. So the PhilBox was able to map the different faults in the Philippines, and based on the findings of PhilBox, we have classified these faults into different seismic sources. So you have a seismic source type A, B, and C. No, for most of our faults, we are using seismic source type A, which can generate magnitude of earthquakes 7 up to 8.4. So, but nevertheless, I would like to emphasize that both near or far source earthquakes can affect structures. Soil type is also a very major consideration. No? So when you have soft soil, your ground acceleration can be amplified. No? So to emphasize further, if we just look at our experiences in the past so many months, no, in the Mindanao 2019 earthquake, the Davao City was affected, no, and the source of the earthquake is 150 kilometers away. In the Chuson supermarket earthquake, the source is in Casiles, Zambales, and the Chuson supermarket is about 25 kilometers away. And here in Metro Manila, we have experienced ground shaking. In fact, some of our tall buildings experienced shaking, leading to some rooftop swimming pools to expel water. So also in the National Structural Code, we consider the effect of strong wind. No, in the latest Structural Code or in the latest NSCP, we considered and revised the code or the wind zones and the wind map to consider the effects of strong typhoons, not only Typhoon Yolanda. So our present wind code or our present wind map already requires us to design from about 250 kilometers per hour up to 310 kilometers per hour for houses in areas like in the Bicol region or in the Cagayan area. In Metro Manila, the wind velocity required is about 260 kilometers per hour. So in our design of structures, we also have to consider various hazards, no, like liquefaction. So Feedboxad provide is continuously generating maps to show where which areas are liquefaction prone. Like for example, this Metro Manila map, you would see here that areas of Manila and Pasig are prone or highly liquefiable. No? So it is good for us to know as developers or as builders to determine what are the hazards present in the areas that we're building or are developing. No? So there's a good reference or there's a good information that PVOX had provided. So you can download or you can visit PVOX Hazard Hunter, and you will be able to know the different hazards that is found in that area. Like for this example, I chose the PICC area, and you would see that there for a seismic hazard assessment, this is prone to an intensity 8 earthquake, and liquefaction is highly potential, and this is also prone to tsunami. So Feedbox had provided us with this hazard hunter, and you would be able to find look into different hazards that are present in the area, and this can aid you as developers or builders in preparing um, for the sites or the structures that you're going to build. The NSCP is continuously evolving, no? With the help of Feedbox. In the coming NSCP 8th edition, our NSCP now is in the 7th edition. So we are moving from a fault map to a spectral acceleration map. So this spectral acceleration map, similar to the wind map I've shown you, is made of contours showing the ground acceleration that can be used in the design of different structures. So this map is more refined than the fault map, and this will ensure that we also refine our design and calculations for building structures. So NSCP 8th edition would most probably be up by 2022. At present, our code committee, the codes committee of ASEP, is doing work on the revision of the present NSCP. So as President Celis had said, no, the ASEP is also doing its groundworks on the National Structural Code of the Philippines, Volume 3, which is housing. So we felt that there's a need for us to develop standards for both buildings as well as housing. And this housing as defined would be single family dwellings, houses or structures that have small GFAs, 1 to 2 stories in height. It will also look into the building materials and systems for housing that are presently being used in the Philippines or in the international field. No? So at present, we are looking at these various systems that may be included in the national the volume 3 for housing. So we are looking into the conventional RC beam column systems. You have your reinforced concrete beams and columns, and then you have the CHB walls, which are non-load bearing. And then we're also looking into load bearing CHB wall system, where you are using unconfined or confined masonry construction. So confined masonry is where you have the beams and columns, the little beams and columns, and unconfined masonry is purely beam blocks or hollow blocks. Also looking into including cast-in-place bearing wall and slab systems. So this is very common now in the Philippines. We are using this system wherein all structural elements are cast-in-place. So very common now also are solid or precast bearing wall systems using high strength or ultra high performance concrete. And then we are also including light gauge or cold form structural steel construction. So all these different types of systems are now being used in the Philippines, and we feel that there's a need for us to provide standards for these systems, no, as well as individual components like hollow core slabs, metal decking slab, uh, precast slabs, and so on. So for the proposed building act, no, the National Structural Code of the Philippines will remain to be the referral code. And what is significant in the proposed building act is that in the civil code, if you may allow me, the professional responsibility of civil engineers is 15 years. So after 15 years, there will be no professional that is responsible for the building structure. So whether it's a house or it's a high-rise structure. So in the proposed PBA, mandatory inspection and assessment of Class P3 or special structures, which will be discussed by Dr. Pacheco later, is required to be inspected and assessed after 15 years. While ASEP feels that Class P2 structures needs to be assessed also. This would include all other structures that are very common. No? Immediately after 15 years, no one or no professional is expected to be responsible for that structure. So we cannot overemphasize the need to follow the codes and standards, no? And for us to seek qualified professionals to perform the design. The structural design of any structure, whether it's a house or a building, is very complex, no? And sometimes we feel that it's simple for houses, but it's not necessarily true. I would often find houses more complicated to design than typical high-rise structures. So as I've said, no, we need to I think overemphasize the need to look for professionals to perform the design and construct our houses to ensure safety and structural integrity. With the forthcoming approval or legislation of the national of the Philippine Building Act, uh, the National Structural Code will still be the referral code, as I've said, but most likely we will be changing nomenclatures. It will most likely be changed to a National Structural Standard for buildings and other vertical structures. The volume 3 would most likely be the National Structural Standard for housing. So with that, I would like to end my discussion and thank you for listening.
talk. Now we'd like to acknowledge from BOI, Ena Desire Sanchez, SHEDA President Rosie, participants from UAP Pasig, NHMFC Brenda Canonero, Rodel Leocario, Step Bus, Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development Attorney Angel Aguila, Jonel Condat, Christian Dison, DILG Maria Amy Castino, Belinda Castro, Claire Patrocinio, UAP Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, EPC Chapter, Keller Williams Makati CBD, UAP Aklan Boracay, UAP Rizal Taytay. So we'll call on our National President Ricky M. Celis to introduce our next speaker.
Good morning again. Our next speaker is a professor at the Institute of Civil Engineering at the University of the Philippines, Diliman in Quezon City. His illustrious career includes his stint as president of the Association of Structural Engineers of the Philippines and national president of the Philippine Institute of Civil Engineers. He is also academic member of the National Academy of Science and Technology in the Philippines. Two of his most recent engagements through UP include a national project to review and replace the Philippine legislation that regulates building design and construction throughout the Philippines, which is a multidisciplinary study facilitated by the UP National Engineering Center in cooperation with the UP Law Center. Another one is a project to update a national framework of prioritization of seismic retrofit of school buildings, starting with those in Metro Manila. To cover BP 220 and the proposed Philippine Building Act of 2020, ladies and gentlemen, let us all listen to Dr. Benito M. Pacheco.
Thank you, Ricky. Let me start sharing my screen. Okay. Good morning. I hope that you can see my slide.
Yes, sir.
Thank you to Ricky, Mr. Celis, and Andrea for organizing the forum today. I'd like to share with you our work that led to the proposal for the Philippine Building Act. As Ricky mentioned earlier, it would be like not only repainting or re-roofing our house, but fundamentally rebuilding it using parts that still work, but at the same time revisiting our foundations if they're still appropriate for growth and expansion. My slide is not moving.
Professor, you want us to share the slides from
Well,
our
I'm doing it from my end. Can I mod? Okay. Can you share my slides instead?
Professor, okay.
Thank you. So as I was saying, it would be like rebuilding our house, making a new Philippine Building Act and using parts that still work and revisiting our foundations if they're still good for expansion for the future. Next, please. There are 14 measures on file now at the House, and next, please. 3 at the Senate. Next. And the key parts are these chapters. They would look slimmer or shorter than the PD 1096 because the approach that we have recommended from the study is to delegate most of the operational and technical details to the IRRs and the standards. Next, please. So today our 3 objectives would be history, the highlights, and relevance to housing. Next, I would be shifting my terminology as I go on from building to housing to shelter, as I would explain. Next. Well, Isaac Newton, his house, he stayed or worked from home also, as we are doing now. That highlights the importance of a house or a building, not only for, well, sleeping in or spending the day or the night, but for other society purposes. Next, we of course continue to use the laws of physics by Newton in our engineering of buildings. Next, please. And if we were only confined to our engineering training, we might think that as we follow all the laws of physics, all our buildings will be safe, but it takes more than that. We need more from the social sciences, I believe. Next, please. Which brings me to my choice of a shorter title for my presentation today. I would advocate that we refer to our buildings as shelters. Next. And shelter would be the most basic infrastructure. Next. And what will the new Philippine Building Act eventually say? Well, both the PD 1096 and the PBA would acknowledge that every building is a shelter, first and foremost, and then more for other functions. And we are aware, whether by these new nomenclatures or the old, that yes, there are varied occupancies, and therefore people of various walks of life are all concerned about buildings. Well, for example, these existing buildings are vulnerable, exposed and vulnerable to earthquake and other hazards. And of course, so are we, the occupants. Next. It's 2020, we can look back to the history of our national legislation for building regulations. And in the years and decades that passed, we have not basically changed the law, but we have experienced a lot of big disasters. Next, please. Even after our study, it's been referenced that historically, countries with more developed or more nuanced building regulations have been successful reducing not the occurrence of events, but the fatalities from events. Next. And so in 2016, we were requested through the UP Engineering Center and the Law Center to study various aspects, legal arrangements, administrative arrangements, and including technological features of our regulations. Next. And the different specialists who were involved, coming from different fields of specializations, looked into the fire code as well, or the local government code, and issuances of our government offices, and of course, technical details of the science, perhaps the geology, even technology of materials. Next. And looking back, more than 400 stakeholders very keenly contributed ideas to what IRRs may be changed or what main features of the law may need to be changed. We followed different methods to make the study comprehensive. Next. Including international references. And among the issues that we looked more closely into would be connections with the fire code of the Philippines, with the National Structural Code of the Philippines. And here I highlight that we have 3 issuances here that are all called codes. And an example of a conflict or maybe confusion with a referral code is this: the minimum required width of aisles for egress, for example, has been hard-coded, so to speak, into the NBCP, and it is now in conflict with the IRR of the present fire code. Next. With respect to the other referral code, the structural code, peer review of special structures is not well provided in the NBCP, but it is prescribed in the NSCP. And so the dominant issues that surfaced from the consultations are these: that our building permit process may be either too outdated or perhaps too vague and therefore discretionary, feeling that the design of buildings might be unconscious of multiple hazards in many cases, and the worry or the problem of what to do about old buildings being orphaned, quote unquote, by professionals after 15 years of civil liability, or practically what to do in the retrofit, possibly, hopefully, of old buildings. And last but not least, a council. Even after our study, of course, the regulations come into question, like what happened almost a year ago in Mindanao for 3 consecutive earthquakes causing this. Is the building on the right rightfully collapsed while the building on the left is left standing? One wonders. And now in the time of COVID-19 and coinciding with the time of typhoons and floods and landslides, yes, our local government is warning us to take special measures, but do we have to wait for the perfect storm like this before we act? Well, indeed, we have been trying. And the Philippine Development Plan, as well as our national agencies, have pointed out that it's about time, maybe even overdue, to revise the framework of our regulations to deal with not only current, but emergent and emerging issues in the country. So we looked around for examples of good practices also around the Asia Pacific with conditions similar to our country. We looked to New Zealand, we looked to Japan, next please, and a few more. And one realization that we found is that instead of using the term code at all levels of regulations, we endorse that we enact an act of Congress to be followed by executive issuances in terms of regulations, and the third level to become reference standards to differentiate from the others. And yes, this is now a priority in Congress, both the House and the Senate. It has to be followed by also administrative reforms in the departments, as well as technological reforms in our profession and industry. So it is a major step to legislate major reforms. And yes, next please. And the top among them is to streamline the building permit process. And next, to design buildings to be more resilient against multiple hazards, to assess old buildings every 15 years, to incentivize retrofit of those old buildings when found necessary, and to create an interagency and multi-sectoral building regulations and standards council that would review and update every 5 years or sooner when necessary. We need to make it simpler for our simple buildings. Not to exempt them, but not to take them for granted, but to include them in their own distinct track. For example, socialized and economic housing will be transparently a subgroup under residential group R. And that in the permitting process, there would be a simplified track, especially for housing permitting purposes in cooperation or coordination with the other agencies. And that while there would be standard minimum requirements for design, there will be specific levels of standards and technical requirements for housing, distinct yet rationalized, and also still encouraging innovations that can enhance economy. While inspection of existing structures will be required in the Philippine Building Act, it will be simplified still for existing simple housing structures. and that the building owners will not be burdened with new requirements. As I mentioned earlier, we look forward through the Philippine Building Act and the House One-Stop Processing Centers in the process of setting up, that these will facilitate the mass option of permitting for typical housing units. The Office of Local Building Official will need to recognize at least 3 tracks of permitting processes so that the bottlenecks will be unclogged, and that we reserve our more complicated requirements of peer review only for special buildings, which will be more transparently and clearly described and defined in the PBA this time. Still, to make more transparent the regular process for all the rest of regular buildings. And so at the bottom line is that we find that the BRSC would be a good springboard for all these reforms. After the legal reforms in Congress, the executive departments, we believe, will need to establish more partnerships across agencies. Next. Including not only the DPWH, but also the DILG, of course, and even DOST for innovation. Local government units, while pursuing their local autonomy for better safeguard to life and health, will be now in consultation with and obtaining the concurrence of the National Building Official before enacting or implementing local ordinances. Also, there will be regional building appeals boards that would unclog the bottlenecks of appeals and complaints. Next, please. In the end, the spirit that we believe will be promoted by the PBA is collaboration from the compliance side and the enforcement side. And I mentioned here that the DOST and the NEDA will be active players in the collaboration because this is a developmental issue. This is also a technological issue. Many players or sectors will share the responsibility and proportionate also liabilities proportionate to their responsibilities. The BRSC will engage not only the public officials, but private sectors precisely so that this becomes an all of the nation approach. And as an engineer, I advocate that we remember we are after not only regulation, but innovation, including the very commonly mentioned ICT or information and communication technologies that we use in our practice. And so with ICT, it can improve our governance, it can improve our economy, it can improve the consistent safety of our buildings and houses. In summary, and I would like to emphasize this, after 43 years of experience, we are aware that we have regulations and standards that still work well, and yet we need major reforms to fill in some gaps. And so it will amount to rebuilding our house using parts that still work, but in the meantime, changing our foundations to accommodate expansions and other flexibility in the future. While we are balancing, while we're balancing innovation with regulation. And yes, the Philippine Building Act is careful in providing for a systematic transition because, as I said, it is not like a complete demolition of our 40+ experience of PD 1096, throwing away everything, but rather reusing regulations and standards at work, but remodeling our foundations and reusing the parts that still work, and then filling in big gaps so that our regulations and standards can be modernized for the next 50, if not 100 years. That brings me back to the thought that we're dealing not with buildings that are just physical objects, but shelters that serve not only for residents, but protection for all activities of society. So we believe that this is a more social approach to the regulations and the innovations in buildings, structures, and houses. And I hope that we can work together for the passage of this Philippine Building Act. Thank you.
Smart decisions. That's something everyone wants to make. Like when buying a new place. Do you go for location? Energy efficiency? A fresh breeze? Or having no brownouts? How about smart planning and engineering that give you all of these? Take a closer look at West Insula, where you get to live easier, live wiser. At West Insula, you get perks that make day-to-day living a greater comfort. Just think of these smart features. Full backup power. When brownouts happen in the rest of the city, keep the computer, air conditioner, and everything else you need up and running. West Insula provides full backup power in all rooms, in all units. Water saving system. When it comes to wise water management, West Insula is designed to collect, purify, and treat rainwater for use by homeowners, giving you practical savings. Smart vents. And how about staying cool even when the air conditioner is off? West Insula has well-concealed vents that promote optimal airflow through every room, even when the windows are closed. Maximum energy efficiency. West Insula is engineered for ultra-efficient energy consumption. Take advantage of the patented electrical loading system that delivers maximum power at minimum cost. What's more, every homeowner gets to monitor their power consumption right at their doorstep, so you pay only for your own bills. No shared costs, no hidden charges. Atrium. Unique to the design of West Insula is the atrium, a central shaft of wide open space at the core of the structure, offering the added advantages of free-flowing air, natural light, and a relaxing ambiance. Ready to take a look? West Insula, built by EGI and Maryleaf Realty, stands tall with 25 stories at the corner of West Avenue and EDSA Shopping District. A train station, medical clinics, and malls are also just a few minutes away, so you don't have to go far to get far. Intelligent innovations at prime locations. That's what smart engineering for practical living is all about. See one of Insula Condominium's masterpieces for yourself. Schedule a visit to West Insula today. Make the smart move.
Thank you very much to Dr. Pacheco for his presentation. At this point, we would also like to acknowledge Ms. Rosie Tsai Wang, SHDA President, Mr. James Yap from DTI BOI. We would also like to acknowledge the NREA Metro CBD chapter members, architects and engineers, Architect Raymond and Jelay Kimson, Architect Ferdinand Lagman, Architect Augusto Lacson, Engineer Ray Del Mundo, REC Kenneth Trubo. We also have representatives from Rebap Makati and Bellfront Properties. We would like to introduce our Chair Emerita and Chair Lady of the Board of Advisors, Ms. Marisa Del Mar, to introduce our next speaker.
Good morning, everyone, our beloved NREANs. On behalf of our Chair Lady Architect Grace Layog, our National President Ricky Celis, our beloved NREA Board of Advisors, and of course, our Board of Directors. I know my Board of Advisor Marx is here, Attorney Aguila, Ms. Rossi, to all of you, our NREA chapters. We would like to welcome our next speaker. She is the Director of the Bureau of Local Government and Development of the Department of Interior and Local Government, which leads the development and formulation of policies and programs for the capacity development of local government units. She supervises several programs to enhance capacities of local government for a greater autonomy, to pursue local economic development, and to encourage good performance through a performance incentive program, such as the ease of doing business and improving competitiveness of the LGUs. Performance Challenge Fund, rationalizing local planning and mainstreaming DRR and CCA in local development planning. Gender responsive local governance, SDG localization, and establishment of community-based monitoring system, among others. She leads the implementation of different projects supported by UNDP, ADB, and Australian Aid, such local governance and budget reform program, poverty environment initiatives, and review of the LG Code. She holds a bachelor degree in statistics and master's degree of public administration, major in local and regional government from the University of the Philippines. Our fellow Andrians, let us all welcome Director Annalisa Bonagua.
Hello, good morning everyone. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I am tasked to discuss the LTU regulatory function and structural plans. But then okay, thank you. So again, thank you, Miss Marisa, for the kind introduction. I'm requested to share with you LGU regulatory functions and related to building permits and structural plans. Next slide. But before we go through that, let me just show you the guidance from the President. We all know that since he assumed office, President Duterte directed government offices to curb corruption, deliver better services to the people, to streamline the respective services to make this truly efficient and people-friendly, and to ensure that people receive the quality service that they truly deserve, minus the delays by bureaucratic red tape. Next slide. Let me just show you, next slide please, how the Philippines fare in terms of doing business across the different countries. The World Bank conducts annual survey. The slide before, please. The World Bank conducts annual survey on doing business, which compares business regulation across 190 economies. There are 10 aspects of business regulation, like for example, starting a business or dealing with construction permits, assessing finance, hanggang dealing with day-to-day operation. These things that matters to entrepreneurs and our private sector were ranked. The ranking measures both efficiency, cost, and number of interactions. These rankings are used as indicators to simplify business laws and regulation, and also the level of protection for businessmen and their property. Median level na ang Philippines among the 100
We apologize for the interruption. I think our speaker was just disconnected. Kindly wait.
Okay, while waiting for our speaker, we'd like to acknowledge Architect Eric Quadra, UAP Ilocos Vegan Chapter President, Architect Raimundo Florentino, Architect Julius Artates. Thank you.
Our speaker is now online. We'll just wait for her to go on live.
Hello. Sorry, I was cut off.
Loud and clear po.
Okay, so let us proceed. Well, I just would like to know where I ended up. So maybe we can proceed with the next slide, please. Okay, so per recent World Bank survey, 2020, there is have been a great improvement in the Philippines ranking. So from 148 in 2011 to 124 in 2019, we are now at the 95th rank among the 190 economies. So that brings the Philippines into the mid-level. So we're above the median. And among the ASEAN countries, the Philippines rank 7 next to Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Brunei, Vietnam, and Indonesia. I think we can do better than our current ranking. Next slide. Among the indicators being ranked, or among the indicators being used by World Bank in the ranking, starting, let's say, from starting a business, dealing with construction permit, getting electricity, and the rest, dealing with construction permit is placed quite a high score, even above the overall ranking of 95th. So in dealing with construction permit, the Philippines as of 2020 ranks 85th among the 190 economies. Okay, so that's our current ranking of the Philippines compared to the rest of the economies nation global. Let us now discuss the LGU rules on housing and building regulations. The local government units have several related functions or regulatory functions in relation to housing and building regulations, starting with setting the priorities for future spatial development and implementation through the preparation of the comprehensive land use plan following the HLURB guidelines. Second, processing and approval of the subdivision plans, also following the guidelines from HLURB and in compliance with PD 9957 and BP 220. Third is enforcement of the National Building Code. This is a delegated function of the DPWH to the local government units. This function includes the granting or declining of building permits and the certificate of occupancy. And then last is the reclassification of agricultural lands. This has been a function of local government units under the local government code. So LGUs can reclassify agricultural lands except those lands distributed to agrarian reform beneficiaries for housing, economic infrastructure development. Okay, next, legal basis on the role of local government units. Those mentioned roles earlier were actually based on the following laws and statutes. Well, Presidential Decree 1096 or the National Building Code, which was issued in 1977. Republic Act 7160, this is the Local Government Code of 1991. And the recent one, Republic Act 11032, which is the Ease of Doing Business and Efficient Government Service Delivery Act. For the Local Government Code, per Section 20C, the Local Government Code provides that the basis for the primary and dominant basis for future and land resources through the CLUP, which should be enacted through a zoning ordinance. So ito yung ginagamit ng ating mga local government units in deciding whether a specific infrastructure or structure is fit to be constructed in a particular place. And then Section 447 and 448, which provides that Sangguniang Barangay, Sangguniang Bayan and Sangguniang Panglungsod, which are the legislative body of the municipality and the city, to enact ordinances, approve resolution, and appropriate funds for general welfare of the municipality and its inhabitants. So inherent role po talaga ng local governments to act ordinances for the general welfare of their municipality or city and their inhabitants. And then Section 447, particularly those, and 458, particularly numbers 2X, which provides that subject to national law, LGUs are to process and approve subdivision plans for residential, commercial, or industrial purposes, and for other development purposes, and collect processing fees and other charges, and which the proceeds of which shall accrue entirely to the city or the municipality. Next, the National Building Code, as been discussed earlier also by our two gentlemen speakers, which dates back in 1977, particularly on Section 301, which provides that all construction, repair, demolition shall have to obtain building permit before these are done. And Section 309 provides that no structure shall be occupied or used until issued certificate of occupancy. In this particular role of local government units, actually, these has been performed by the DPWH for the longest time, and this was a designated function to the local government unit. So therefore, it's still DPWH that oversee the performance of the function of local government units in terms of the issuance of building permit and certificate of occupancy. And our last legal basis is PD 957 and BP 220. These are the basis of local government units in the review, processing, and approval of the application of subdivision and housing development. The LGU's actions are still based on the guidelines issued by HLURB, which provides for the guidelines and technical requirements for the developments, but particularly both for subdivision lots and condominium, and also for economic and socialized housing. Okay, in the next slide, we would just like to provide you on the status of the updating of CLUPs by local government units. As we all know, the CLUP is the main planning instrument which aims to provide a sound foundation for managing past, current, and projected land use, and for the allocation of land resources to be used for the whole territory of a municipality or a city. As of now, based on HLURB guidelines or HLURB data, there are just around 27% of all cities and municipalities with updated CLUP, and the remaining 73%, although they might have their town plans and old CLUP, are not updated anymore. Okay, next. Recently, the Ease of Doing Business and Efficient Government Service Delivery Act was passed. That was in 2018. The law hopes to encourage investors, developers, and businessmen by simplifying the process and shortening the time of the issuance of business permit licenses, clearances, and all other permits and transactions at the local level. Actually, the title just said Ease of Doing Business, pero yung kasunod po ng Government Service Delivery Act. So, covered po ng Ease of Doing Business Act all business and non-business transactions of local governments. The law also aims to improve the Philippines' standing in the competitiveness and ease of doing business surveys such as the World Bank survey. So next, ano po yung laman ng Ease of Doing Business Act, RA 11032? Una po, zero contact policy. Very fitted po ito sa ating current situation when we are in the pandemic. There should be limited interaction, and there's the encouragement of the use of electronic processes in processing permits, licenses, and clearances at the local level. Also is the streamlined procedures for government agencies Kasama po dito yung use of the unified application form for the transactions that we apply for in the local government units. Like for example, the business permit, all ancillary and related permits for this permit shall be applied with the business permit. So isa lang pong beses tayo mag-a-apply. And the related permits will be processed from the BLO. Sila na po yung pupunta ng location, pupunta sa other offices to get the locational clearance, environmental clearances, and even the barangay clearances. And then business one-stop shop, in view of that unified application form, there has to be a collocation of these offices in a place or in a facility in the local government unit, so that they can collaborate with the issuance of whatever permit is being requested. And then all of this is actually the streamlining and of the processes can be further facilitated through automation and computerization. And then the last one, as mentioned, then integration of barangay clearances and other related permits in the BOSS. So in view of the EODB Act and even prior advocacy of DILG, application of the barangay clearances shall be done at the city and municipal level. So applicants does not have to go to the barangay hall to get their barangay clearances related to business permit and construction permit. And then standard processing time for all the transaction of the local level. All transaction of local government units has to be categorized as simple, complex, highly technical, or those needing sanggunian deliberation. So pagka nakategorize po sila as such, they will have this processing timeline. So 3 days for simple, maximum 7 days for complex, and maximum 20 days for highly technical, and 45 days for those needing sanggunian deliberation. Okay, next. And in view of that, unahin ko po yung nasa baba, dahil meron pong timelines na binigay, there is that provision under the EODB Act of automatic approval and automatic extension, that if your applications are complete and already been paid, pag lumampas po sila sa timelines provided under the law, you can invoke the deem approve or the automatic approval and automatic extension. This can be done by raising your concern through ARTA or the Anti-Red Tape Authority. Local government units are also asked to formulate their citizen charter. Dito po makikita yung, this is the official document that communicates to the public. Tayo po, kung kayo tayo nag-a-apply. In simple terms, the services and the standards of the frontline services being provided by the local government units to its citizen or to the private sector. And then the business one-stop shop, as mentioned also, this is very important, that there is collocation and integration of processes of different regulatory services for streamlined permit and for by the use of the unified application form and electronic or promoting the electronic system for registration, filing, and payment of fees and charges. Okay, many of the Metro Manila cities already have their BOSS. And right now, in view of the technology and in view of the current situation, the national government is pushing for an electronic BOSS. So hindi na po kailangan ng physical collocation, but they have to have just integration of their computerized systems. Okay, next. On another provision of the JMC, or the JMC also, in line with the Ease of Doing Business Act, the DILG with DPWH, DICT, and DTI issued a policy, Joint Memorandum Circular 2018-1, which streamlines the processes for the issuance of building permit and certificate of occupancy. So the JMC provides for standards for processing construction-related permits, starting with use of this is applicable only for simple structures, since as mentioned also by a previous speaker, that there has to be a simplified process for simple structure. And then the JMC also sets standard steps and processing time for the application or processing of building permits and certificate of occupancy for simple structure, use of unified application form, use of one-time assessment and payment, and also maximum of one signatory for the issuance of the permit, the promotion of the one-stop construction permit, or similar to the BOSS for the business permit, and the automation of the processes at the local government units, particularly construction-related permits. So ito po yung definition of the simple structure. This is only, the JMC will only apply or the JMC only covers the simple application or simple structure. Simple structure covers single dwelling, residential building of not more than 3-story, commercial building of not more than 2-story, warehouse not storing hazardous substance with I think an area of not more than 1,000 square meter, and then renovation within a mall with issued building permit. So this is the coverage of the JMC. So standards in processing the building permit in terms of time, since it was categorized as complex, so under the law, they have 7 days, but for this particular issuance and for the particular application to simple structures, the standard is 5 days for simple structure, including the already the FSIC and FSEC of the Bureau of Fire. And then number of steps will be only four steps. Ang 4 steps na sinasabi natin dito is on the perspective of the applicant, hindi po yung doon sa loob o sa internal operation of the local government units, kasi they might have several controls before the approval, but as long as in terms of at the perspective of the client, 4 lang po yung steps. It's filing, receipt of the order of payment, then payment, and then claim of the building permit. And then well, as been mentioned also, yung use of the unified form. The unified form with concurrence of the DPWH has been issued officially. So these are in the website. So I think from now on, the building officials of local government units will be using the unified form issued already by the DPWH. And the number of signatories, at least for the building permit, we encourage only 1 signatory, and that is the signature of the building official or the approval of the building official in the application for building permit and certificate of occupancy. Also under standards in the processing of the building permits, requirements of documents generated from LGU, such as tax declaration, tax receipt, locational clearance, or zoning clearance, will no longer be submitted by the applicant. So dati po kinukuha nyo isa-isa yan. Ngayon po, with the new standard issue or with the new process issued under the JMC, it will form part of the backroom operation. So once you applied for your building permit, since the tax declaration, tax receipt, and locational clearance are also issued by the local government units, it will be the OBO or the Office of Building Official who will secure those permits within the local government units' other department in order to process your building permit. And next, clearances from NGAs and local government units and other local government units department as provided by ordinance will be submitted within 30 days after the issuance of the building permit. So you have to secure, yun lang yun, all national clearances have to be secured within 30 days after the issuance of the building permit. Otherwise, the building permit shall be null and void. And then failure to submit these clearances may suspend the building permit and delay the implementation or delay the approval of your certificate of occupancy. For the barangay clearance will be issued. Actually, it will be applied and issued at the city and municipal level. Even the payment of the building clearance, the barangay clearance fee will be done at the city and municipal level, no longer at the barangay level. Hindi po tinatanggal nito yung barangay clearance, but what we are saying is that the barangay clearance application, even payment and even release of the barangay clearance can be done at the city hall or the municipal hall. It will be the role of the OBO to communicate with the barangay regarding the issuance of the barangay clearance. Okay, next. Okay. For the private sector, actually, the DILG have a mechanism for which the private sector or the applicants, the businesses, can actually provide feedback on the LGU's performance or your satisfaction on the services provided by local government units. We have the Rate My LGU service. This is an online platform for clients, for developers, for businesses, investors of local government units to provide feedback on the services rendered by the local government units. So you can just log on to the Rate My LGU service via ratemylguservice.dilg.gov.ph and fill up the survey form and then submit. Your responses will be directly sent to the DILG portal. So DILG lang po ang may access. What we do is that we compile all the responses or all the feedback from the clients of local government units and provide the local government units with the results. So kami lang po at ang DILG lang at ang local government units ang nakakaalam ng results ng Rate My LGU service. This is actually developed and intended to continuously improve the services of local government units, not for anything else, so that we can receive your feedback on the level of your satisfaction as well as your recommendation to continuously improve the services of our local government units. Okay, I think that's the last. Well, for the challenges in closing, there are a lot of challenges at the local level in performing the roles related to building and housing regulation. First of this is rivaling mandates. So there are mandates from DAR, DSUD, DPWH, which actually somehow, if not contradict, which are not consistent with each other. Definitely because they have to protect their own sector. So DAR and DA have to protect their agrarian resources, while DSUD would like to have land resources for housing development, while DPWH would like to have a piece of the land for development of the utilities and the road network. So there's a need for stronger coordination of the sectoral agencies and administration. And also there's, I think, a need for a national legal framework for aligning the plans of agencies in order to improve cooperation and also to improve policies that are being brought down to the local government units level. Next is the complexity of in planning policies vis-a-vis the limited capacities of local government units. Now, we kept on wondering why the CLUP has been required for a very long time, and yet only 27% of our local government units are able to update regularly their comprehensive land use plan. And then third, standards being enforced by local government units dates back 20, 30, well, 43 years na po yung National Building Code. So I think this needs updating, as even emphasized by our earlier speakers. No? Then last is the continuous improvement in local government regulation and services. So I think we need the private sector cooperation and partnership for you to recommend ways on how we can improve ease of doing business, not just at the national, but more specifically at the local level. So I think that's the last of my slide. Marami pong salamat sa inyong lahat and magandang umaga po.
JAC is considered as one of the leading suppliers of phenolic, plywood, and lumber in the Philippines, with its office located at Unit Number 204 RRC2, MLQ Street, San Miguel, Taguig City. The company just started last December 2017 as a retailer and wholesaler. Through its continued commitment in providing high-quality phenolic plywood and lumber, Jack Enterprises was able to keep up with the demands of the construction industry and well-known developers. Again, we would like to mention and give thanks to our very generous sponsors, Megawide, eGanzon Incorporated, Jack Enterprises, and Duraville Realty and Development Corporation.
Thank you, Secchen Jovi. Now, thank you so much, Director Ana Bonagua, for that very comprehensive talk. And now we are in our open forum, or the question and answer portion. Our moderators are our board chair lady, Architect Grace Layug, and our NREA advisor, Mr. Marcelino Mendoza.
Good morning, everybody. Good noon, good evening to our viewers and our listeners. Thank you so much to our great speakers. Mr. Mars Mendoza, my partner, could you start with the first question from our audience? Mr. Mars. We're not connected with Mr. Mars. Anyway, I will give the first question. Either Engineer Ison or Dr. Pacheco may answer. Considering that we have our environment damaged drastically in the recent years, of course, 40 years or 50 years ago, it was not that bad. Is there any provision in the proposed amendments that would drastically enable us to fight climate change and save Earth? Dr. Pacheco?
Yes, if I may add a reply to that. Yes po, our PBA is more conscious than ever about sustainable development, and therefore, while it does not usurp the role of the planning side from the CLUP, it recognizes that it's a prerequisite before any building can be permitted. So location and therefore zoning is enshrined in the new PBA to be a very crucial step. Secondly, the design criteria or design parameters, including also construction parameters for buildings under the new PBA, would be more mindful of sustainable materials or energy conservation, water conservation. All because, yes, instead po of saying environmental protection, we enshrine in the PBA sustainable development, which covers environment, the economy, and of course, society. So yes, lalo pong very conscious ang ating PBA in light of climate change trends, as well as our other natural hazards in the country.
Thank you, Dr. Pacheco. Engineer Ison, in your example earlier, when you cited PICC, I think there was a table presented wherein the location is on high risk for tsunami, but safe for storm surge. Could you give us further explanation on this?
Well, actually, the photo I shared you is from the data gathered from the Hazard Hunter coming from PHIVOLCS. It's basically the assessment made by PHIVOLCS, and it can be shown in those. Actually, there are more than aside from the seismic hazard, you have the meteorological as well as the meteorological and volcanic hazards that are present in those. When you look into those websites, regarding the tsunami hazard, I think PHIVOLCS put in there that the PICC area would be susceptible to tsunami hazard. I am not aware why storm surge would not be part of it. I would think that it's because the PICC is far from the coast, and but during storm surges, most likely the inundation would not reach that far as PICC area is, which is different. Storm surge which will be different from a tsunami occurrence.
But wouldn't tsunami be more disastrous than a storm surge?
Yes, the tsunami would be more disastrous than a storm surge. It is generated very far from the source, and it will get based on studies, at least a foot of tsunami would already be disastrous to people, and of course a higher level tsunami would be disastrous to structures.
Thank you, sir. Now we have a question for our Director Banagua. Are all of these procedures po na-consider na yung volume of applications? For some, LGU separated ang individual application. Yung procedures po kasi, it seems applicable siya sa individual application lang po.
Kasi we are talking about two major permits being asked by our clients to our local government units. These are business permit and building permit. Ito yung pinakamadami. These are the major permits being requested by clients. So therefore, especially for this kind of application, consolidated, integrated na po yan. So you just have to apply with the BPLO office or the Business Permit and Licensing Office for your business permit application, and for your building permit and certificate of occupancy application for the OBO. All related ancillary permits for those two permits shall be secured by the offices or by the BPLO at saka OBO within the local government unit. So you don't have to secure each and every related permits for those two major permits. So, yun ang tinatawag namin sa local government units na concierge, wherein the business permit licensing office will receive the application, and they themselves, their office mismo, ang kukuha ng mga related permits related to the business permit, and yung OBO, sila ang lalakad ng permits related to the building permit, like locational clearance and the rest. But for other specific permits na talagang single lang, they have to apply it at the local level. Kung for example, let's say, ano pa ba yung mga, let's say excavation permits, siya lang yon. So they have to apply it separately.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Again, for Director Banagua, you mentioned earlier that upon application for, let's say, a building permit, the tax deck, the tax receipt, the locational and zoning clearance would all be done by the office, the building official. Napakaganda pong step yun.
Yes, ma'am. Opo, that is
applicants.
Opo, that is in compliance with the Ease of Doing Business Act and also under the JMC. Although we recognize that not all local government units has set in place the mechanism to implement this, but we are doing our best at the ILG to help our local government units so that they can actually do this, particularly the OBO, kasi they have to expand their personal complement so that they can actually relate to the offices, relate to the offices wherein they need to coordinate. And then I think kung automated kasi ang mga systems in the local government units, this kind of process will be very easy, no? Kasi nasa isang ang sinasabi lagi namin sa local government units ay isang local government lang naman kayo. Bakit kailangang applicants have to go through the different offices in your LGU just to secure one permit or the other related permits for one major permit? So yan po, this is one initiative that we are currently doing, although since the JMC was issued in 2018, we are seeing a few local, now a good number of local government units, specifically in NCR and most of the cities who are already compliant, but we have to do some capacity building in many of the municipalities nationwide. Thank you po.
Actually, ma'am, that's the next question. The question is, when would it be implemented by the LGUs, and how much percentage of the LGUs have started to implement that? If you have the data on that.
In terms of number, siguro po I can roughly say or generally say that Metro Manila cities and most of the first-class cities are already able to implement this, but then the rest of the cities and many of the municipalities are still improving their systems and procedure. Kasi po, hindi naman po pagka-issue namin ng policy, LGUs are already able to comply, but effective na po yung policy. In terms of compliance, LGUs are doing their best. We are monitoring their compliance. So kung nasaan na sila, they are still instituting systems, procedures, coordination mechanism among the different offices in the local government units. So siguro we can roughly say a third of the cities and municipalities are already compliant to this particular policy.
Thank you, ma'am. For Dr. Pacheco, sir, in NEDAS, we recover as one report. It was recommended that moving forward, public health must be a foremost consideration in land use and local shelter planning. Housing design may need to be changed to integrate washing areas into the main structures. And low-cost and socialized housing development should ensure ample public and green spaces. Now, with the proposed Philippine Building Act, is there any update on any particular provision that would support this direction?
Yes. In the PBA po, there are sections that pertain to enhancing the comfort, also safety and health of people around the building or structure being applied for permitting. In other words, hindi lang po yung mga own occupants of a building ang concern ng designer and constructor of a building or house, but indeed the surroundings. The specifics are not there as to the standards of health, but the principle of protecting the health of the public, not to be adversely affected by any building, nandun po yan. Secondly, in terms of indoor design of buildings, yes, the principles are enshrined in the PBA that the design criteria would include healthy indoor environments. We may have heard of the phenomenon of sick buildings before, where the indoor environment could be really causing health problems to occupants, even without COVID. So this time in the PBA, it is more explicit that the indoor environment in terms of air, in terms of circulation, and also water, and also in terms of the ability to isolate parts of a building when necessary, as we are experiencing now for quarantine purposes. I guess we are better educated this time, moving forward, making the IRR to anticipate the details of public health protection around and inside a building from now on.
Madam Chair Lady?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am, we would like to acknowledge Architect Eric C. Cuadra, UAP Ilocos Vegan Chapter President, Architect Raimundo Florentino, and Architect Julius Artates. Again, I think board member Mr. Mars Mendoza is already online.
Yeah. My partner, Mr. Mars.
Yeah. Can I be heard already?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, some of the questions in the chat box are about the transition. No, Dr. Pacheco, we want to reiterate that we are fully supportive of the proposed bill, no? And this has been a long time coming, and we really anticipate that this should be approved soon, no? But some of the questions would revolve around the transition. For example, there is a BSRC. There is also a Regional Building and Appeals Board, no? So this has to be constituted. So how do you envision the timeline after, let's say, the approval of the bill and considering the IRR?
Thank you for the question. I remember po in the bill or the different versions of the bill to prioritize the formation and operationalization of the Building Regulations and Standards Council. Pina-prioritize po within 3 months operational siya dapat because in fact instrumental si BRC to put together the rest of the IRR and revalidation or readoption of standards or even new standards. So 3 months is a crunch time, I would imagine, para po mag-startup mode ang BRSC, which will be a very crucial element in the implementation. And therefore, there's an initial provision of budget, how this can be operationalized. I mean the BRSC. Likewise, the bigger picture is the bill, the proposed act envisions that within 1 year or 9 months after the creation of the BRSC, all the member agencies would have come together already and revisited and readopted. As I mentioned, we believe, and there's a report, that many existing regulations and standards could still be valid and applicable even under the new PBA, and there would only be some gaps that need to be filled. So the job of rearranging the parts and then working on the remaining or gaps, the tall order, of course, it's a big challenge, would be 3 months and then 9 more months to 1 year to make the regulations and the newly rearranged standards operatable. In the meantime, the PBA is very conscious that as like any transition, in the interim, yung pong mga existing processes and standards and of course rules would still persist or remain because we do not wish any disruption in our economic activities. So 3 months and then 9 more months, hopefully in a year as envisioned, with the proper budget to the operationalization, we can see the fruition of the actual workable parts of the PBA po.
Yeah, that's very comforting po. And on behalf of the associations and the professional associations, we would like to really request that there will be consultations as part of the implementation of this law. No? For example, one of the questions here is if there are differences between local ordinances and the law as would be approved, how do we go about this?
Sir Mars, if I may pick up that question, I would mention that there is a very early section in the PBA, Section 5, that precisely, I may have mentioned it briefly also in my presentation, precisely anticipates that the council, among other things, will have to attend to the procedure of how local government units will practically coordinate and seek the concurrence of the national office so that local ordinances also are harmonized with national in the same way that existing national regulations are revisited and readopted. Kaya po talagang in-envision na this time all the concerned government offices, including local, will need to come together. Para po yung example ni Director Monago earlier, parang sa back room, lahat ng government offices involved magkita-kita na para before issuing regulations or standards, whether readopted or new, na harmonized na po. And any additional local ordinances in the future, likewise, to follow a well-laid process na mayroong consultation with national and also, of course, all the member sectors in the BRSC so that consistency is protected or ensured and there are no surprises and maybe even there would be sharing of good practices. So yes, coordination through the council, the BRSC, will be again key to that.
One of the new provisions, or well, at least I think it's new, is the maintenance provision. And I think this is very important because in other countries, we know, London, for example, Singapore, they have very old buildings, but yet they are working, they're still in place. Now, ang question ko lang po dyan ay, how is this going to be implemented? Siguro ho, ang una, government buildings. Kasi
yes, sir.
baka yun ang pinakamadaling follow the leader.
I think you hit the heart of the matter. Even in the PBA po, nakalagay yan, the government buildings will set the examples, whether new government buildings or government buildings being renovated or expanded, and indeed just being maintained. Magsaset ng example po. Even with possible retrofit, ang government buildings po ang inuuna na magset ng example. But eventually, as you know, the private sector will have to take the cue and implement on their own with some guidance or even some incentives. Just like any mature economy, after 50 or 40 plus years of national regulation, we know that we also have a mature building stock. So privately owned man po or government owned, yes, the new PBA gives now its own attention due to existing. We would rather not call them old, we would rather call them existing, and therefore hopefully extend their useful life. Environment friendly rin po kasi to preserve and conserve structures and buildings that can still function with judicious maintenance. So the maintenance plan as a requirement, or maintenance strategy rather, as a requirement under the PBA will be the starting point so that owners are obligated to think forward, not only to operate or occupy, but to imagine 15 years, 50 years or longer in the lifespan of their building or house.
Yeah, that's very good to hear. Architect Grace, I think we have more questions from the chat box.
Yes, I have a question for Engineer Ison. Sir, we know very well that we have very good engineers in the Philippines, Filipino engineers who are even working or have worked abroad and have contributed well to the design practices of the countries abroad. How is it, sir, that in the Philippines, a simple road would be reworked on so many times? I mean, is it ordinary for, let's say, the strip of road to be worked on and reworked every other year or every year? Or is the problem really on the materials that we're using or on the workmanship of our laborers? Could you expound on this, sir?
Well, actually, that's a very tricky question. I would say though that most of our engineers, in fact, even local engineers who have not worked abroad, would be capable of constructing and designing very good infrastructure, particularly our roads. No, there are definite standards, quality control measures to make proper roads. No, I think maybe because we're redoing most of our infrastructure, like roads, yung mga asphalt roads, concrete, even concrete roads, probably due to lack in good construction methods. Or for example, it may probably during the construction the specifications were not followed to the letter. In fact, or maybe even the materials are not to the standard. So that's why we're reworking our roads quite often. So I think it's basically if we adhere to the required standards, even in the preparation of the bases and then the construction of the actual pavements, then we should have no problem and we would not be doing any reworks or regular maintenance of our roads. So I cannot really answer I can't really answer why we have been reworking. I think it's basically we should have a higher standard in, I think, as I've said, basically, I think we should have a higher standard in constructing our infrastructure, or we should try to implement a higher standard in doing our infrastructure.
Architect Grace, if I may add,
Opo.
we may be referring to roads or around a site of a building, but I would like to emphasize that probably one thing that we still lack in the maturity of our practice or in the industry is testing of materials. I think it's classic that roads and therefore the local materials underlying a road, meaning the base, really need to be tested. The materials really need to be tested in every location, because the materials may really vary from place to place, much more than materials from a factory like steel or cement would vary. So I really believe personally that we need to reinforce or be better in testing local materials. And that is true also for aggregates, for example, in reinforced concrete construction, that those aggregates sourced from local sources, we need good testing. So I emphasize that there is a science and technology behind that should also support our industry. Materials testing, local materials testing po, I believe, is one key, including for roads or even for concrete for other structures.
Thank you, sir. But Dr. Pacheco, as a follow-up question on that, is there anything in the Philippine Building Act that could help the taxpayers overcome this problem of repetitive roadworks?
Well, following what I said earlier po, one addition or one new feature in our PBA, not only for buildings, but I would say for construction in general, is the recognition or accreditation of testing laboratories. It's only one component, but it's a very important component. The professionals may be so good, the designers may be so good, the construction supervisors may be so good.
I believe so.
But if we are not sure about the quality of materials as actually produced or sourced, so testing laboratories po are being accredited and recognized under the PBA. So that's a part of the additional provisions of the PBA for quality assurance.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Marsh, you have another question?
Yeah, to Engineer Rani, how can everybody, the developers, the planners, how can they access all of the hazard maps and the soil maps so that at the initial, even at the initial buying stage or roll and purchase stage, this would be taken as a big consideration already in the plans, in the purchase price, whether it could be a viable investment or development even. So where are these available? Are they available in the website, for example?
Yeah, Sir Mars, Engineer Mars, the hazard maps are available with the DENR. And also, as I've shown earlier, the hazard maps are also prepared by PHIVOLCS regarding volcanic hazards and liquefaction hazards and earthquake hazards. And then definitely for developers, you need to also take into consideration taking individual surveys. Like for example, when you're trying to buy some piece of land, there's a need to do some pre-engineering surveys like the geotechnical surveys, the slope test, and then so there are a number of information that can be taken prior to the actual purchase of land to check its viability. Agencies like I said, DNR, DOST would have MGB would have a number of data that can be useful to developers.
Yeah, thank you, Rani. Dr. Pacheco, because the price of land in Metro Manila and the urban cities are really very prohibitive and expensive, the trend is towards mid-rise, no? Mid-rise buildings, no? So how is this taken care of in the proposed National Building Act?
Thank you for asking that. And when I mentioned housing, partly during my presentation, of course, I did not mean only single detached housing. I had in mind, and now we can mention that even walk-ups or mid-rise housing structures in urban areas is already well contemplated. In the PBA po, it's recognized that housing, whether socialized or economic, may in fact take the form of walk-ups or medium rise, and still they should be eligible to be processed as in a separate track for housing. We are mindful that the occupancy defines the track or partly defines the track for simplified processing. We're very careful, however, that now we're not talking anymore of single detached 1-story or 2 stories. But yes, pwede pong pag-usapan with economic approach as well as safety or technical approach yung ating mga walk-ups or mid-rise structures. I believe that's been contemplated even sa releases 2 years ago or so of our HUD-C regarding fulfilling housing requirements or projects within the urban areas po, ano?
Yes.
So, yeah.
So,
thank you very much to our distinguished guests. And before we let them have their final words and comments, may we request everyone to kindly turn on your videos or your cameras as we have a photo opportunity. Secretariat, kindly take the photos.
Really?
Yan, so I can hear cameras clicking, so you may also do your cameras. Okay, so turning over to our moderators and for our distinguished speakers for their final words before we hand over the certificates.
Yes, we have many more questions, but please just send it to our chat box and we'll try to forward them to our guest speakers. May we have some final words from our speakers? May we start with Director Bonagua?
Una po sa lahat, marami pong salamat for the invitation. I think this is a very fitting time for us to be updated on the new policies that are being pushed for the implementation by the entire national government and local government units. I think it's about time to update many of our policies, rules, regulation, and even standards. Some of them, yun nga, as mentioned, dates back 30, 40 plus years ago. And I think there are a lot of developments and new technologies that has to be inputted or integrated into the rules, regulation, and standards that we have right now. Our local government units will always comply with the mandates and the requirements of whatever laws are implemented. Siyempre, they just have to comply. They have to be consistent with the national laws and policies. But I think knowing that local government units are mainly responsible for their constituency, their inhabitants within their local government units, some of them are overprotective and might even implement more than the minimum requirements under the law. So that's the reason why the ILG and also the other oversight agencies in terms of housing and shelter and planning are here to actually balance this regulation and also the enforcement and compliance of our local government units. So magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat and it's nice to be here. Marami pong salamat.
Thank you so much po, Director Bonagua. Maybe move on to Engineer Ison.
Yes, again, I would like to thank Andrea for inviting me to be a speaker for this very fruitful seminar. No? As a president, no, we would be we would be appreciative if NREA would give some inputs regarding the ASEP Volume 3 on housing. So we can better improve and probably make it more acceptable, or not acceptable and amenable to all the requirements of the housing sector. And also, no, I would like everyone to encourage everyone to push for the legislation of the Philippine Building Act. We feel that this would greatly improve in terms of safety and integrity the structures, whether existing or new structures in the Philippines. No? So with that, I would like to say good afternoon and have a good day.
Maraming salamat po, sir. And Dr. Pacheco.
Thank you again. Like the two speakers before me, I thank NREA very much for organizing today's forum. We got reoriented or reacquainted with initiatives that even now ginagawa na po sa local governments or ginagawa na sa professions, namely updating, streamlining our procedures, updating our standards to the extent that we can. The second message is, of course, that there's a limit to what we can modify presently if we only work through under the existing law. That is why after the multi-year study of the existing PD 1096 and the IRR, it's been concluded that we do need a more fundamental reform, and hopefully, therefore, within a year, we can transition to a new setup where we can do better coordination among agencies and sectors, as well as look to our existing buildings. That's the second cornerstone of the PBA, that maintenance and care for existing buildings is equally important as the design and construction of new ones. So just like an organization, just like Mr. Celis said earlier, we look at this perhaps as rebuilding our house, our organization. We can do better by changing or modifying, improving our fundamentals, our foundations. Again, maraming salamat po for organizing this forum.
Maraming salamat po, sir. And to all our speakers, maraming salamat po. Please allow us to present our certificates of appreciation. The National Real Estate Association, Inc., the one-stop trade organization, presents this certificate of appreciation to our Honorable Annalisa F. Bonagua, CESO III, in sincere appreciation of your invaluable service to the association, particularly as a special guest and speaker during the NREA Business Forum Online, Philippine Building Act as replacement for the National Building Code of the Philippines on September 22, 2020 via Zoom and NREA Philippines Facebook Live. Signed, yours truly, Board Chair Lady, Architect Grace S. Layug, our Chair Emerita, Marisa Del Mar, our National President, Mr. Ricky Celis, and our Secretary General, Mr. Jovi Francis M. Tupas. Mr. Mars.
Yeah, the National Real Estate Association, Inc. presents this certificate of appreciation to Engineer Ronaldo Izon in sincere appreciation of your invaluable service to the association, particularly as guest speaker during the NREA Business Forum Online, Philippine Building Act as replacement for the National Building Code of the Philippines on September 22, 2020 via Zoom and NREA Philippines Facebook Live. Signed, Architect Grace Layug, Board Chair Lady, Marisa Del Mar, Chair Emerita, Ricky M. Celis, National President, and Jovi Francis Tupas, National Secretary General. For Dr. and Professor Benito M. Pacheco, the National Real Estate Association, Inc. proudly presents this certificate of appreciation in sincere appreciation of your invaluable service to the association, particularly as special guest and speaker during the NREA Business Forum Online Philippine Building Act as replacement for the National Building Code of the Philippines on September 22, 2020 via Zoom and NREA Philippines Facebook Live. Signed, Architect Grace Layug, Board Chair Lady, Marisa Del Mar, Chair Emerita, Ricky Amcelis, National President, and Joby Francis Tupas, Secretary General. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat po.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
po. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank
To
you.
all our speakers and to our listeners and viewers, maraming salamat po.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you,
very
Prof.
much.
Thank
For
you,
those na hindi
Rosie.
pa nakapag-picture, so we will be opening Zoom again for photo op.
Okay, ulit.
Oh, yung mga nandyan pa, photo op tayo ulit.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, thank you to our sponsors, Megawide, E. Ganzon Incorporated, Jack Enterprises, and Duraville Realty and Development Corporation.
Thank you, Rosie, for joining us.
Oy, salamat Ricky. Very informative. Parang may overload tuloy ako. Hindi kasi ako engineer.
Nandito. Hi, Red.
Salamat Ricky. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you po.
Hi, Sunny. Thank you very much for joining.
Imelda, salamat ah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon. See you soon.
UV, Ricky.